Walking Dead Dead City Episode 3. People are a resource. So we're continuing with our little references to Negan and just our whole connection to this new villain. And there's a lot of new connections in this episode, not just with the villain, but just like new characters that are with Negan and everything like that. It's very interesting dynamics between the characters, more with Negan this episode, I would say, more than like Maggie this episode. It was definitely a very flip-floppy type of episode for the story of Negan once again, which is kind of just the way it seems to go these days. So we basically start the episode out with another flashback, which we had a flashback last week, I think, with Maggie and Herschel. This time it is with Negan and Ginny. So Ginny was the kid that was with Negan, obviously, in the first episode, and we're continuing to follow her story a little bit after she was sent off to the hilltop. So at the end of the last episode, she was like leaving the hilltop and she wanted to go find Negan, basically, because she's not fitting in at the hilltop. So she wants to go find Negan, and now we're obviously going to get this connection and this little bit of a story between her and Negan as they were out and about doing whatever. Before they ran into Maggie and they went off to Manhattan. So we're back in the forest again. We're back in the woods. Basic, typical Walking Dead situation right there, but don't worry, we got plenty in the city. But we got a little flashback. Negan's wearing his cowboy hat, I guess. He's out there with Ginny, and she's basically, because she doesn't speak, he's mad because she won't like yell out or scream out that she's in danger, and he's like, he doesn't want her to be in danger, and he's very worried that like if she, she's super quiet this whole time and she refuses to yell or say anything, that she's going to get herself hurt because she's not going to yell out for help. So that's kind of how we started the episode. So it's like this relationship between Negan. It's almost like a father-daughter type relationship in a weird way, because it's like it's not his daughter, but that's like the relationship they're trying to set up here, even though he has a kid and a wife out there somewhere, which we'll get into later. It's interesting that they decided to go with like this new character instead of like maybe his own kid. Maybe, I guess his own kid maybe wouldn't be old enough to have a bigger role, but yeah, that's the story they're going with Ginny. So we got that flashback, and then we jump back to Ginny, who is obviously going off to Manhattan because she's trying to find Negan. So she's trying to go back to Negan, and I think this whole beginning here, like in the present with Ginny, is a little silly. The way she gets to Manhattan is like she finds like a cooler, and she like floats over with like a wooden board as a paddle to get to Manhattan. Like, okay, sure. We start the episode with another Walking Dead CGI deer. And it's a little better than the big old CGI deer debacle way back in season 8 of Walking Dead, when they were fighting the saviors and they had Rick and Michonne out there with the CGI deer. It looked bad. In this one, it's another CGI deer, and it's pretty obvious that it's pretty CGI. Like it doesn't look that great, actually. I think it's a lot better than we had that one like years ago, but it doesn't look that great either. But who cares? It's not that important. But they're like hunting a deer in the city. Of course, conveniently, there's a random deer right there in the city for them to hunt, and that's what they're doing. So we cut to our new characters, and our new characters, I still don't know their names. I still have not learned their names at this point. I know they've said their names, I just haven't memorized it yet. But our two new main characters here in this show with that group, with Maggie and Negan, they basically tell this story of how they were in the city as kids. So I'm assuming they're not like that old. They're about 12 to 15 years in the apocalypse now. That's kind of the general like timeline we're in now. So like they could easily still be kids in like when the apocalypse happened, and then now obviously they're grown up. It just kind of shows how far into the apocalypse we are. And they mentioned how they were kids when the city fell, and the military came in and they bombed the bridges and everything like that, and they could not get out of the city. And then shortly after, the Croat and whoever else, after they were trying to build themselves up in the city, the Croat came in and basically messed all that up. And now he's kind of like this leading guy in charge in the city, taking charge of everything. So we got that little mention. And while he's like mentioning that, the guy here on the left, while he's mentioning that, it brings up similar vibes to how Negan does things, because obviously when you mention the Croat and how the Croat, he operates and everything like that, it's because of Negan. Negan and him have a relationship, and the Croat went off to basically start his own thing, I would assume, basically as an understanding of how Negan operated, and that's kind of how he's doing it in a way. And it gets Maggie all like worked up. Like, we got this weird PTSD Maggie in this show, and I'm okay with it because, I mean, it makes sense for them to do this again, as I've said, to bring this issue between Negan and Maggie back up, with Glenn and everything. But it's like, it has been so long now, and I think some viewers could get kind of tired of the constant like PTSD Maggie super pissed off. Like, whenever I watch Maggie, I like the character of Maggie, but I always feel like I get like this weird anxiety watching the character of Maggie, because I always feel like she's about to explode. Like, I feel like she's about to explode and just lose her shit on someone. I don't know why. I obviously probably on Negan, but I just feel like every time Maggie is on the screen, I feel like she is going to literally lose her shit on somebody. And I'm kind of tired of feeling that way, because I felt that way in, the later seasons of Walking Dead when she came back, and with Negan again there too as well. So it's always this thing with Negan in the room where I guess it makes sense, but it's like I'm getting a little tired of feeling that way with this character, and I want us to move on a little bit beyond this whole increased tension between these two characters, because I get why there's that tension, but they do mention in this episode later that it's been like 12 to 15 years. Like, I know it was a terrible thing, but we've had, even like besides the timeline, we've just had so much TV time now away from what happened with Glenn and Negan. Like, it was terrible, I get it, but as a viewer, like, it's getting repetitive with that. So I will say that I hope we do move on from that within this show significantly. We cut back to Ginny, and she makes it to the city, and we get to see this interesting shot. It's all like a CGI city, this like CGI'd apocalyptic Manhattan, and we get to see this like image here of the new like World Trade Center that was being built, and it kind of gives us a sense of the timeline that we're in. Is like the World Trade Center is not even done being built yet, the new one, and you can see they're like in the middle of construction of this thing, and that's when the apocalypse happened. I think the apocalypse in the timeline of The Walking Dead is when the show started, which is like 2010, so they weren't even done with that building yet. It kind of gives us that timeline once again, like this all began in 2010, and now I'm thinking we're in normal time now, like 2023, 2024. I think that's our timeline. I think we're just sticking with the current time now as all these shows are happening. So I would assume it's like 2023, 2024, and that's just kind of where the world fell. And that's just kind of, so whenever you see like imagery and anything like that, like you're not gonna have like a new smartphone or anything like that in The Walking Dead. You're gonna have whatever was available by the time the world fell. And I think that is a very interesting like detail that they should continue to try and keep. And I hope they continue, because whenever I see those little things, it's like, yeah, okay, it makes sense. Like, this is the world of The Walking Dead. This is when it happened. And I think those little details, they do matter, especially if you want to keep all this making sense to some way. So we get this thing with Negan. They're obviously they're like scoping out the Croat's arena that he's like centered in, and they're trying to figure out how they're gonna get in there and get Herschel. We don't see Herschel in this episode, and we didn't see him last episode either. We did. We see him in the flashback, but we don't see him in the present since the first one. So they're trying to find Herschel, they're trying to get to him, and they need to get into the arena, because that's where the Croat is. And Negan brings up the story of this man in the South who basically took charge and terrorized these people. And eventually these people that he terrorized, they got tired of it, and they overthrew him, and they beat the man, they defeated him. And he's obviously mentioning the story of himself with the Saviors, and how he terrorized Rick's group and Maggie and everything like that. Like, that's the story he mentioned. So he's bringing it up like, yeah, I was a terrible man. He didn't really mention himself. He said it like a story, and it's like, we can defeat the Croat because, you know, I know these people who defeated this other evil man, which is himself. And they keep bringing up the whole fact that Negan did these awful things to Maggie and Rick's group. And I get it. We got to bring it up. It's interesting because that's the main dynamic between Negan and Maggie. But in the main show, we did kind of move past it a little bit. We all know what happened. I know it's a new show, so maybe you want to reintroduce people a little bit to what happened with Negan in the Saviors and Rick's group. But we don't need to mention it like almost every episode. I hope we don't continue to just bring it up over and over again. Like, we know what happened, and we can kind of move on. The main show even moved on a little bit. We know what happened with Negan, and he kind of we moved on from that story, and we moved on to newer things with Negan and his relationship with the group and how he wanted to fit in. And I hope we can continue to do that, but not like get continuously repetitive with bringing up what happened in the past. We do need to move on at some point in some way. Not totally, but in some way. So we got the Marshal, and the Marshal at the end of that last episode was taken in by the Croat, and I kind of thought he was like gonna be like a little team up, like, oh, we're gonna go find Negan. I think that's gonna happen at the end of this episode and to the next one now. We're gonna team up to go after Negan, but right now he's like the prisoner for the Croat, and he takes him into this like weird, creepy arena. He's shoving walkers in like these tanks, and we get to see, you know, the Croat's place. So it's obviously like this big arena. He's got this little thing in the center, this little ring, and that's basically where they, you know, have their shows. And we'll see that later in this episode, where they do weird things like all these villain groups in the Walking Dead's universe do. So we cut back to, I don't remember his name. I'm sorry, I really don't. I'll remember it at some point. He mentions that he escaped from the Croat, and he was able to, you know, find these certain tunnels and stuff like that within the arena itself in that area. So he was able to, he was captured by him, and he was able to escape. And he's the only one that really kind of knows how to get away from the Croat and how to get in, because that's how he got out, is how they can get in and get to him, because the whole arena is surrounded by a bunch of walkers. So we get to the scene with the Croat and the Marshal, and the Croat is basically like the villain explaining all of his evil plans in some weird way. He tells them how they create energy from like the decomposing bodies and gases and whatever from all the walkers below. It was really weird. And then he pulls out the key for the handcuffs that the Marshal's like, you know, handcuffed to the railing over there. He's like, here's the key. He kind of holds it up, and he's got this meal set up, like, okay, when he wants to convince the Marshal, like, I'm on your side, you know. What do you know? What do you know? Why are you here on the city? Why are you here in the city? So he's got this meal. He's got this meal with like a steak and everything, and then he cuts the steak open, and it's like got bugs in it and stuff, so it's not safe meat. It's like all rotten meat. And there's like this guy there helping him out, and one of his soldiers, and he gets pissed off at his soldier because he served him rotten meat. He didn't check the meat. So what he does is he has this key for the handcuffs for the Marshal, and he makes his soldier guy like swallow the key. And he's obviously mad at this guy because he's a very impulsive, you know, villain character, so he's obviously going to kill this guy. So he kills this guy. He like bashes his head over the railing and then throws him over the railing. So the detail here is that he made him swallow the key. And it's like, what is that going to mean? It's going to mean something later, where what we do with the Marshal in that ring there in the center of the arena. We get the Maggie, and we get to see some cool pictures. We get to see some pictures of her and Herschel, not her son Herschel, but her father Herschel, who died way back in The Walking Dead, now season 4. But we see a picture. She's got a bunch of pictures of, you know, through her life, I guess, right now. We got a picture of her and Herschel, her father, and then I think that's Tara. Because that's like baby Herschel. Around that time, Tara was alive. Because we had like season 9, the beginning of season 9 had like baby Herschel. It had Tara still around before she was killed by the Whisperers. And it was like baby Herschel. So Rick was still there too. And I think that's when that picture was taken. I think that's what that is. And then we also have, we have Herschel's or Glenn's watch in there, and then we have a drawing of Glenn as well. So Glenn is always the central motivation for Maggie, and that's kind of just always how it is. Then Negan walks in and he explains what happened to his wife and kid. So I think his kid was like Joshua or something. Don't if I'm wrong on that, sorry. They mentioned his name, so he has a son and his kid Annie. He mentions that Annie went out to do something in like a town or a city, and she got like beat up and assaulted by like people. And I'm assuming, I think it was maybe New Babylon. She got assaulted, and he went out to seek out those people then, and I think he like killed a bunch of those people. He essentially lashed out and became like an old Negan, I guess, against these people that attacked his wife. And he feels that he sent Annie and his kid off to some new place, and he stayed behind because I think he doesn't want them to be around him. Maybe that's why we're building this dynamic of him and Ginny. It's like maybe he realizes he can be a caring person in some way, and maybe he should go back to his wife and son, which I think he should. We'll see where that goes, but we did get an explanation of what happened to his wife and kid, that he kind of sent them off, and that's why they're not in this. We do come back to the flashback a few times with Negan and Ginny, and it's basically more of their connection once again between like a father-daughter type relationship here. It's interesting, I guess. They're just kind of standing there in the woods, and it's basically this flashback that Ginny's having while she's out in the city, trying to find Negan. She's got this little dinosaur stuffed animal that's kind of like a central like item for her in this episode between her and Negan, and it's like this little stuffed animal thing that she likes to carry around. She's a kid, and she's running around in the city, and she ends up dropping it. This walker like freaks her out. Then there's like this random person that walks by, takes out the walker, and picks up the dinosaur stuffed animal and walks off with it. So conveniently now she like loses this item, and she wants to go find this item, and we all know where it's going to lead her. It's going to lead her to Negan and Maggie, where they are in the group. So we jump to our group, our hero group, I guess, whatever. And this is like a really weird scene for me. I don't know if it's supposed to be kind of like a very sad type of scene, like everyone's kind of mourning their people they've lost, and they pull out all these different items in front of them and like hum this like tune, and I guess it's supposed to like signify like something very important and sad for them, but it just felt kind of weird and kind of creepy to me. I know it wasn't meant to be that way, but it felt that way to me. And after they did their little weird ritual around their food, they ate. So it was strange, but whatever. I guess we're just kind of trying to build a dynamic with this new group. I don't know how long this new group is going to last. The Walking Dead likes to move on to new groups and people and whatever all the time. So the time limit on this group in the city here could be limited. Who knows? We jump back to the Marshal and the Croat, and as I mentioned, we're going to go into this arena. In the center of the arena, this little ring, and he asks the Marshal one last time, "What do you know?" And the Marshal does not answer. He hasn't talked to him at all. He's been silent. So the Croat's fed up. He puts this big mask over his face and basically kind of drugs him, and then throws him into the arena, into the ring, and handcuffs him to the bar in the center. So he basically throws him in there, and he throws in the new walker that he just made from his old soldier that he killed. This is the one with the key inside. So he lets the walker in, and basically the objective is to essentially kill the walker and get the key out of the walker to escape, because he's going to put more walkers in later. He fights the walker a few times. He pulls the head off with his handcuffs, a little over the top, but then he rips open the walker, gets the key out, and then fights off a few more walkers. And then he also pulls off his boot, and there's a little bit something with his boot where like he reaches for like his left boot. to fight the, because he has nothing to fight the walkers with. Then that he's about to pull his left boot off, and he pulls off his right one instead, and the Croat notices that, and that's kind of like a little key detail for the end scene. We jump back to Maggie in the group, and this person that was like scavenging out and about that found the stuffed dinosaur conveniently is of course with the group Negan and Maggie are with. And Maggie notices this stuffed animal. I don't know if Ginny, I would assume Ginny had it when she was with, I'd have to go back. Ginny had it with Negan and Maggie when she was with them, and she recognized the dinosaur and she wants to go and burn it. Basically, we see the end of the episode. She wants to burn this thing. She almost tries to. We don't see it, but yeah, she takes it from the scavenger. She says, "I know someone who would like that. I know a little girl who would like this stuffed animal." So we do get a little throwback with the Croat. He actually mentions his story with his family. He had like a wife and 2 daughters and a son, I think, and they were like locked away in some building, and I think he essentially mentions that like walkers got to them, I think, and they were all killed. But that was after, or it was right around the time when he found Negan. So right around the time his family was killed, he found Negan as his new family. He mentions, "I found a man who became my family," or something like that, and we all know that's Negan. And the boot thing comes back up here, where the Croat basically mentions, "What is in your boot? You're not talking to me at all." But I did notice that, like, "What are you hiding in that boot of yours?" So he gets the guy to pull off his boot, and he finds this note or letter, I would assume from his brother that died. It was like a message sent to him and his family, and how like he can't do this anymore and anything like that. So it's like a little message note it's like the same thing that we saw from that he was holding around the whole time with the address. So he gets that. He learns a little bit about the marshal from that. And then the marshal finally speaks up and says, "It's just me. I'm the only one here. I'm tracking down a man. My 2 partners have been killed that I came to the city with. And I'm here to find a guy. I'm here to find a man, track him down. And his name is Negan." And that's where we leave off on the story with the Croat and the marshal, as he mentions the name Negan. And we kind of get like a quick little glimpse of the Croat's reaction, but we don't see much of it. He kind of like looks down and is like, "Yeah, all right." So Negan is now on his mind. He knows that Negan is there in the city, and we'll see where that one goes. I think that'll be very interesting to see his motivations, knowing now that Negan is on the island. He's in the city now. The episode is still not over. We still get some pretty dark things to happen. Negan is confronted by, I remember this guy's name. I guess just mentioned it a few more times. I don't know why. I remember his name, Luther, and won't need to remember his name too much longer, because this episode is his last, I would say. So he confronts Negan. He finds his wanted poster, and he basically doesn't want Negan to be around anymore. He feels like he is untrustworthy, and he feels like he's unsafe. So he doesn't want Negan and Maggie around anymore, and he's confronting Negan, and it doesn't work out for him. So Negan and him, they throw some words around, and then they get into a scuffle. Negan has like this cheese grater. He scrapes it across his face. It's the only weapon he has in like the kitchen there. And Luther essentially gets thrown to the ground after he scrapes his face. And conveniently, there's like this metal bar sticking out of the ground here, sticking on the ground. He falls directly on it, and this guy in the group, Luther, is now dead. And it's a very dark scene for Negan, more because of how he's like standing above him afterwards. Like, he didn't necessarily like kill him totally. Like, it was kind of his own fault, Luther's own fault. Like, he attacked Negan, and Negan defended himself, and he just kind of fell over. But it still made Negan look pretty dark, and obviously they're going to think Negan did it, unless he, covers it up in some way or gets out of it. But it made Negan look very dark again, which they're contrasting between this very lighthearted scene with Negan and Ginny, and then him in this super dark moment with him standing over Luther as he's dying with this pipe in his back of his head. So Luther's dead. He basically kills him the rest of the way. He's like lying there, and he pushes his head into the thing. So he kind of finishes him off, and he's dead. So that's how that ends with Negan, really. We get to see that scene once again, as I said, it's contrasting with Negan and Ginny. So we get to see the stuffed dinosaur with Negan, and he wraps it up because there's like a hole in it. And there's this, it was basically like a quick bonding scene between these two characters, and it was kind of stretched out throughout the whole episode. And the basically it ends with Negan saying that if you ever are in trouble, because you're not speaking, if you're ever in trouble, just do this whistle. And he does like this little whistle, and he says, all right, if you're not going to speak, at least whistle so I know that you're in trouble, and I will be there. Even if I'm not here, if you do this whistle, I will be there. I will make sure I'm there. It was very conveniently timed, I think, because it's going to happen next episode. Maggie is there, and she's about to burn the stuffed animal into like this barrel, and she's watching. So Ginny is off on the side behind a car watching Maggie with her stuffed animal, and I would assume that she's going to whistle. That's my guess right now. She's going to whistle, and Negan is going to know that Ginny's there. Maggie's going to know that Ginny's there then, and that's how they're going to get confronted with Ginny again, and then Ginny's going to be with them and running around with them in the city, I would assume. So that's basically how it ends, though. Like, that's it. That's the last shot with Maggie. Negan is standing over Luther's body. It looks like he really killed him, even though Luther kind of attacked him. Maggie wants to burn this stuffed animal. You know, she's like, still like this anti-Negan type thing in a way. It's weird. It's such a weird, conflicted story between Negan and Maggie, which, you know, that's kind of the whole plot of this show, I would assume. I would guess. I mean, you know, if you're going to put these two characters together, that's the dynamic you're going to create. So that's where we're at, and I gotta say, it's getting really interesting. I do like the new characters. Not really the ones, the new group they're with. I like the Croat more and the Marshal. Those are the new characters I really like a lot more. Ginny's okay. Like, she hasn't really done a whole lot yet. I don't really care that much for Ginny yet. But I mean, the connections they're building with Negan, just the dynamic between Negan and Maggie is still interesting. I do hope we move on from this always constant mentioning of what happened between Negan and the Saviors and Rick's group and Maggie. Like, we know what happened. We don't need to mention it all the time, nonstop. Like, we know what happened, and I think we can move on from at least talking about it all the time. We can see what happened. We know when they're not happy with each other and they look at each other all angrily and weird. We know what happened. We don't need to have another speech about what happened between these characters, because we know. And I can't say that enough. So besides that, though, like, it's a very interesting story. It's a very different vibe than the main show. Like, very different type of story, very different vibe, because we're in the city of Manhattan. And yeah, I think it's interesting. I still think it's a lot better than the spin-offs we've had of The Walking Dead so far. It's definitely the best one. It's very much like a Walking Dead sequel in a way, because the intro itself like gives that vibe, and we're following big main characters here that we really care about. It feels like a true Walking Dead sequel finally. In a way, it's still new, but it's like a sequel to the main show with some very significant characters. So that's my breakdown, my thoughts throughout this episode. Episode 3 was good. I still think it can get better, and I still think it will, as we're now building up to the Croat versus Negan, basically, and Maggie. And we'll see where it goes. And I'm interested to see what happens with the Marshal character, because the Marshal character is still like this guy who's like our in-between type of character. Like, he's not super friendly to our main characters, our heroes, but he's also like not friendly with the Croat. He's also not like he's with the Croat maybe, but not. Like, it's weird. It's an interesting story. So we'll see where it goes. Episode 3 was good though. And yeah, I'm excited for the next 3.